The shattered sea stretched endlessly beneath the storm-lit sky, its waves rolling in a slow, whispering chant. The night was thick with salt and mystery, and at its heart, the feared pirate captain Dant Blackway stood at the helm of his ship, the Leviathan's grin, his coat billowing like a black flag in the wind. His sharp green eyes glowed beneath the shadow of his tricorn hat, scanning the darkened waters. A storm was coming, not one of nature, but of fate. "Captain, the wreck is just ahead," shouted Ronan Tyfury, his first mate, a burly man with a long, braided beard like the roots of an ancient tree. The crew gathered at the railings, whispering among themselves. They all knew the legends. A ship swallowed by the azure tide was never truly lost, only waiting. The shipwreck loomed before them, half submerged in the moonlit waves. Its bones were silver, its mast twisted with coral, its deck littered with glowing pearls. But it was one object, one forbidden relic, that called to Dante. At the ship's heart, a massive pearl sat cradled in broken wood, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Dante stepped forward. The sea murmured to him, though he did not understand its language. His fingers brushed against the pearl's surface. It was warm, impossibly warm. And then the world shattered. A flash of deep blue light erupted from the pearl, blinding the crew. The ocean roared, the waves rising as if waking from a 1,000-year slumber. Dante stumbled backward, gripping his sword as the air itself hummed with power. And then she emerged. From the water rose a woman, no, something more than a woman. Her hair was long, woven from strands of starlit sapphire, her eyes deep as the ocean's abyss. Her skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow, her delicate features caught between beauty and danger. Pearlescent scales trailed from her shoulders down her arms, fading as they reached her fingertips. Dante's breath caught. The mermaid opened her eyes, blinking as if waking from a dream. And then she fell forward, collapsing into his arms. The moment their skin touched, a surge of warmth spread through Dante's veins, like the sea had wrapped around his soul. He held her carefully. She was strangely heavier than she looked. Her breathing was fast, her face hot, her lips parted in confusion. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice carrying the rhythm of the tide itself. Dante had no answer. He only knew one thing. His fate was no longer his own. As the storm closed in, the Leviathan's grin turned away from the wreck, carrying both man and mermaid into the unknown. The scent of salt and damp wood filled the dimly lit captain's quarters. Serena Tideworn stirred, her body heavy, her thoughts tangled like seaweed caught in a storm. She blinked, the golden candlelight flickering against the wooden walls. The ship rocked beneath her, its slow creaks like a heartbeat echoing through the room. She sat up and immediately realized something was wrong. Her body, it felt different. Her long silken hair tumbled over her shoulders in cascading waves, heavier than before. Her arms, once slender and weightless in the water, now felt strangely firm, strong. Her skin was still kissed with shimmering iridescence, but something about it was human, too human. Serena's heart pounded as she looked down. Gone was her sleek, elegant mermaid's tail. In its place were long-toned legs, her feet resting awkwardly against the wooden floor. She gasped, gripping the edge of the bed for balance. Why was she so large? A deep voice startled her. "You're awake." She turned sharply, her breath catching. Captain Dant Blackwave stood near the door, arms crossed over his chest. His dark coat framed his broad shoulders, the flickering light casting sharp angles across his strong, sea-worn face. His green eyes, sharp as a dagger's edge, watched her carefully, like a man studying something far more dangerous than treasure. Serena swallowed hard, heat rising to her cheeks. What have you done to me?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Dante raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're the one who burst out of a cursed pearl and knocked half my crew unconscious with that light show." Her fingers curled against the bed's edge. A memory flashed, the shipwreck, the pearl's glow, the feeling of breaking free. And then, nothing. "This can't be real," she whispered, touching her own skin as if trying to wake from a dream. "This isn't my body." Dante stepped closer, resting a hand on the desk beside him. "I wouldn't know. but you certainly collapsed onto me like a cannonball. He smirked. Not exactly the delicate sea creature I was expecting. Serena's eyes widened. Cannonball? Was he saying she was? She scrambled to stand, but the moment she did, her legs wobbled wildly, throwing her off balance. She was taller than she remembered, stronger, bigger. Dante instinctively caught her before she fell, his hands gripping her waist to steady her. Serena froze. The warmth of this touch sent a spark racing up her spine. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Her face burned hotter. He was close, too close. She had been held before, but never like this. Never as a human, as something new, something unfamiliar. She shoved herself upright, breaking away. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice uneven. Dante raised his hands in surrender, amused. "Fine, but if you fall again, I'm not fishing you off the floor." Serena's fists clenched. This was humiliating. She was a princess of the deep, a daughter of the tides, not some helpless, blushing girl fumbling on human legs. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stand tall. There must be a way to reverse this, she muttered, mostly to herself. Dante sighed, leaning back against the desk. "Well, if you figure it out, let me know before the crew starts questioning why their captain suddenly has a towering mermaid on board who." He gestured vaguely at her. "Looks like she could wrestle a sea serpent." Serena stiffened. A horrible realization struck her. "Am I bigger than you?" she asked, hesitant. Dante blinked, then grinned. "You just noticed?" Her hands flew to her burning face. This was a nightmare. The wind howled through the sails of the Leviathan's grin, tearing through the ropes like the cries of restless spirits. Dark clouds churned above, and the sea beneath them was no longer calm. It trembled, rising in unnatural waves that glowed with an eerie blue light. Then Blackwave stood at the ship's wheel, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the wood with practiced strength. The storm had come fast, too fast. This wasn't nature's work. Something in the depths had awoken. Serena stood near the railing, her long midnight blue hair whipping wildly in the wind. She could feel it too. The sea was angry. The moment she had stepped onto this ship, the ocean had changed, like it had sensed that something was no longer right. And now it was coming for her. Dante's voice cut through the roaring wind. "All hands, brace yourselves. This storm ain't natural." The crew scrambled to secure the ship, shouting orders and tying down cargo, but a monstrous wave, twice the height of the mast, rose before them. It curled at the peak, forming a gaping mouth of water, and inside its depths, something moved. Serena's breath hitched. The drowned witches. Their figures swayed beneath the surface, their hollow eyes glowing like deep sea lanterns, their arms outstretched. The witches of the abyss, banished long ago, had finally found her. A whisper slithered through the storm, a voice that crawled over the ship like mist. "You are ours, Tyborn." The wave came crashing down. Serena reacted on instinct, throwing out her hands. A shockwave of blue energy pulsed from her fingers, parting the water at the last second. The ship lurched violently, tossed like a toy, but it did not sink. Dante turned, eyes flashing with something between shock and admiration. "I hope you've got more tricks like that." Serena's breathing was uneven. She had power, but not enough. If she were still in her true mermaid form, she could have called the tides, commanded the waves to obey. But like this, she was weak. Another wave began to form. The witches would not stop. They would drag her back to the abyss if she didn't act. Serena turned to Dante. "You need to let me go." His expression darkened. "Not happening." "You don't understand," she said, stepping closer, the storm whipping around them. "They want me. If I go into the water, they'll take me, and this ship will be spared." Dante scoffed, gripping the wheel tighter. "Do I look like the kind of man who lets his crew die just to save himself?" "You don't have a choice," she yelled over the wind. "The ocean will never stop hunting me. If I stay, it will come for all of you." Dante's gaze was unreadable. There was a fire in his eyes, a stubbornness as deep as the sea itself. "You think I don't know what it means to be hunted?" His voice was low, cutting through the chaos. "You think I haven't stared death in the face and told it to wait its turn?" Serena's breath caught. Another massive wave loomed ahead, taller than the last, shaped by the witch's will. Dan's lips curled into a reckless grin. If the sea wants you, it'll have to go through me first. And then he made his move. He spun the ship's wheel, driving the Leviathan's grin straight into the heart of the storm. The crew screamed. Serena clutched the railing as the ship tilted, climbing the monstrous wave like a beast ascending a mountain. The witches shrieked beneath the water, their voices laced with fury. For one impossible moment, the ship was at the peak of the wave, balanced between the sky and the abyss. Serena turned to Dante, his coat whipping in the wind, his expression fierce, as if defying the gods themselves. Then, the ship plunged forward, slicing through the storm, escaping fate itself. Behind them, the witches' wails faded into the depths. The sea fell silent. The storm had lost. Serena stared at Dante, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from something else. Something she didn't want to name. The storm had passed. The Leviathan's grin drifted through the calm sea, its sails torn, its deck littered with broken barrels and frayed ropes. The crew moved like ghosts, shaken but alive, their murmurs filled with awe and disbelief. They had survived. Serena stood near the ship's bow, staring at the horizon where the storm had once raged. The witches were gone for now, but she could still feel their presence, a cold whisper beneath the waves, waiting for the moment she would be weak again. She wasn't safe, and neither was the crew. A deep voice broke her thoughts. "You got that look." She turned to find damp Blackwave leaning against the mast, arms crossed, his coat still damp from the rain. The wind ruffled his dark hair, the golden sunset casting a fiery glow over his sea-worn face. He studied her, sharp green eyes unreadable. Serena frowned. What look? The look of someone about to do something reckless. She exhaled, turning away. "I should leave," she murmured. "The sea is not done hunting me. If I stay, your ship will never be safe." Nanda let out a low chuckle. "I don't recall asking for safety." Serena's heart clenched. Why was he so stubborn? Why was he treating this like some game, when it was her fate that had doomed him? She turned to face him fully. "You don't understand, Dante. The ocean will not let me go. My people, they are bound to the tide. We are not meant to leave it. The fact that I am standing here, in this form, is a curse." Dante stepped closer. "A curse, huh?" His voice was calm, thoughtful. "Funny. Looks more like freedom to me." Serena stiffened. "What?" He gestured to her, her long, shimmering hair, her stronger human form, the way she stood on her own 2 feet. "You're breathing air, walking on deck, looking at the world beyond the water. That's not a curse, Serena. That's a choice." She swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever questioned the fate that bound her. Dante watched her, then sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I don't know much about mermaid magic or ancient ocean grudges, but I know this. You saved my crew. You saved my ship. And around here, that means something." His gaze softened, voice turning steady. "I don't abandon my own. If you think I'm throwing you overboard, you've got another thing coming." Serena's breath caught. He was keeping her? No one had ever wanted her outside of the ocean. Not like this. Not without a price. She didn't know what to say. The wind shifted, cool against her skin. She closed her eyes, listening to the sea's distant whispers. They called for her, as they'd always had, but now, another voice called too. Dante's. Serena opened her eyes. The sun had dipped below the horizon, the sky fading into deep violet. This ship was no longer just a vessel, it was a crossroads. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure which path she wanted to take. The night air was cool against Serena's skin as she stood at the railing, gazing at the moonlit sea. The waves shimmered under the silver glow, calling to her like an old lover whispering secrets. The ocean had always been her home, her fate, but now the ship beneath her feet felt just as real. She didn't belong here, and yet she didn't belong there anymore either. Behind her, the sound of boots against the wooden deck made her tense. Damp Blackwave strolled up beside her, arms resting on the railing as he followed her gaze. His dark coat hung loosely around his broad shoulders, and the flickering lantern light caught the sharp angles of his face. "You're thinking about running." Serena's fingers curled against the railing. "Not running," she said quietly. "Just wondering if staying is a mistake." Dante smirked. "That's pirate thinking." She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" He turned to her, green eyes gleaming with mischief. "A sailor is bound to the sea, but a pirate makes his own fate." He tapped the wooden deck beneath them. "This ship, it was once a royal frigate, built to hunt men like me. But I took it, reforged it, made it my own." His voice softened, but it held the weight of certainty. "Just because you were made for something doesn't mean you have to stay chained to it." Serena's breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared to challenge the will of the sea itself. For so long, she had believed she was a creature of fate. But Dant, this reckless, stubborn pirate, spoke of freedom as if it were a simple choice. She turned fully to him. "And what if I stay? What happens then?" Dante's smirk deepened. "Then you're part of my crew." Serena let out a sharp laugh. "A mermaid as a pirate, that's madness." Dante shrugged. "Piracy and madness go hand in hand." His gaze flickered over her, considering. "But I don't take just anyone. You want to stay? Prove you belong." She crossed her arms. "And how would I do that?" His grin was full of challenge. "A wager." Serena narrowed her eyes. "What kind of wager?" Dante pushed off the railing and stepped back, his boots tapping against the deck. "You say the sea is your domain? Fine. Let's see how well you handle a little fight." She tilted her head. "A fight?" Dante tossed something at her, a wooden cutlass, dull but sturdy. "First to land 3 hits wins. If you win, you're free to leave." His grin turned teasing. "But if I win, you stay." Serena stared at him. "You want me to fight you?" Dante twirled his own cutlass effortlessly in his hand. "Unless you're scared." She huffed, gripping the wooden sword. This was ridiculous. She had fought with tridents, with magic, with the crushing weight of the sea behind her. But this, a duel on a wooden ship? And yet, something in her burned with excitement. The crew had begun to gather, watching with interest. A mermaid versus the captain. It was madness. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of challenge she couldn't refuse. She stepped forward, raising the cutlass. "Don't cry when I beat you, pirate." Dante's laughter rang through the night. "Show me what you've got, princess." And with that, the duel began. The air was thick with tension as Serena and Dante Blackwave circled each other, wooden cutlasses in hand. The flickering lanterns cast long shadows across the deck, and the sea breeze carried the quiet murmurs of the gathered crew. A duel between their captain and a mermaid. This was a story they'd tell for years. Dante smirked, rolling his shoulders. "Last chance to back out, princess." Serena narrowed her ocean blue eyes, gripping the cutlass tighter. "You talk too much, pirate." Then she struck. She moved fast, faster than any normal woman should. Her blade sliced through the air, aimed straight for Dante's ribs. But he was faster. He twisted at the last second, sidestepping her attack with effortless grace. Clack. Wooden swords clashed, the impact sending a shiver up Serena's arm. Dante pushed back, forcing her to retreat a step. He grinned. "Not bad." She didn't respond. Instead, she spun, her hair whipping like a wave, and swung again, this time feinting left before striking from the right. Dante barely dodged, the blade grazing his coat. He let out a low whistle. "All right, you're not just pretty, you're dangerous." Serena smirked. "Now you're catching on." The duel became a dance. Strike, parry, dodge, counter. Serena's movements were fluid, instinctive, like the sea itself. But Dante was different. He wasn't just reacting, he was reading her, learning her rhythm, adjusting to it like a sailor riding the storm. And then, he changed the tide. Serena lunged, expecting another dodge, but Dante didn't move away. Instead, he stepped into her attack, catching her wrist and twisting just enough to throw off her balance. She gasped as her back met the mast, the wood solid and unyielding. Before she could react, Dante's cutlass stopped an inch from her throat. Silence. The crew held their breath. The only sound was the distant crash of waves. Dante's grin was slow, knowing. That's one. Serena's heart pounded, not just from the fight, but from the way his green eyes held hers, the way his breath brushed against her skin. He was close, too close. But she wasn't done yet. With a sudden shift, she dropped low, sweeping his legs. Dante lost his footing, stumbling back just enough for her to twist free. Her cutlass flicked forward, tapping his chest before he could recover. She smirked. That's one for me. The crew erupted in cheers. The game was on. Dante straightened, amusement flashing in his gaze. Clever girl. They clashed again, harder, faster. Sparks of energy crackled in the air around Serena, remnants of her lost magic aching to return. She could feel the pull of the sea, the weight of her old life pressing against her, but she ignored it. Because for the first time, she wasn't just fighting to escape. She was fighting to stay. Another strike, another block. Then Dante twisted behind her, catching her wrist again. But this time she was ready. She used the momentum to spin into him, pressing her blade against his chest before this could land on her shoulder. Dante glanced down at the cutlass pressed to his heart. His smile widened. All right, that's two. Serena's pulse thundered in her ears. His hand was still on her wrist. His body was too warm, too solid against hers. The moment stretched, electric and breathless. Dan's voice dropped lower. Careful, princess. You might actually win. Serena's lips parted. For a second, she forgot what they were fighting for. And in that second, Dante moved. With one swift motion, he flipped their positions, pressing her back against the mast once more. His cutlass came up tap. Serena's breath caught. Dante grinned. 3. The crew roared with laughter and cheers. Serena let out a slow breath, staring up at the man who had bested her. Not just in the fight, but in ways she didn't even understand yet. Dante leaned in just slightly, voice a teasing whisper. Looks like you're staying, Mermaid. The Leviathan's grin cut through the midnight waves, its sails full under the whispering wind. The crew, still buzzing from the duel, had finally settled back into their duties. The night was calm, too calm. Serena sat near the ship's railing, fingers grazing the wood. She had lost the wager. She was staying. And yet the thought didn't unsettle her the way she expected. Dante had won, but the look in his eyes when he declared victory, it wasn't one of conquest. It was something else. Something she wasn't ready to name. Footsteps approached. Heavy boots, a familiar presence. She didn't have to look up to know it was Dante Blackwave. He leaned against the railing beside her, arms crossed, looking out at the horizon. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood there, near her. Serena broke the silence first. I let my guard down. Dante smirked. No, I won fair and square. She gave him a sideways glance. You cheated. His grin widened. That's pirate thinking. A reluctant laugh escaped her lips. She shook her head, staring at the ocean beyond. I don't understand you. Dante's expression softened. That makes two of us. Serena turned to him then, her gaze searching. Why did you fight for me to stay? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, something gleaming in the lantern light. A silver pendant. She frowned. What is that? Dante held it up, turning it between his fingers. When I was a boy, a storm took my father's ship. He went down with it. His voice was calm, but the weight of old pain lingered beneath the words. The ocean doesn't give back what it takes. I learned that early. Serena swallowed. She knew the truth of his words better than anyone. Dante turned to her then, his green eyes steady, unwavering. But you came from that same sea, and instead of taking, you saved us. The words settled deep in her chest, heavy and warm at the same time. She looked away. You don't know what I am. Dante tilted his head. I know enough. Serena clenched her hands. If you knew the truth, you wouldn't trust me. Dante was silent for a long moment, then finally said, Then tell me. Serena's breath caught. She had spent her life hiding from the sea witches, from her own kind, from the humans who would fear her. But Dante, he wasn't afraid. She hesitated, then whispered, I am not just a mermaid. I am the daughter of the tidlers. The ocean listens to me. And if the witches ever find me, they will not stop until they drag me back. Dan's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He didn't recoil. He smirked. Then it's a good thing you have a pirate for protection. Serena's chest tightened. You don't understand. The ocean, it will fight for me. It will cause storms, raise waves. Dante leaned closer. Then let it come. His voice was quiet, but firm, unshakable. I've fought storms before. She stared at him. This man, this ridiculous, reckless pirate, was looking at her as if she was worth fighting for. Something inside her unraveled. A breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of salt and storm, a warning. The sea witches weren't far. She could feel them now, stirring beneath the waves. Dante sensed the shift in her posture. What is it? Serena gripped the railing. They'd found me. Dante's smirk faded. He straightened, scanning the dark waters. Then we fight. Serena turned to him, her heart pounding. You don't understand. This storm, it won't stop until it takes me back. Dante's hand brushed against hers, steady grounding. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. Then they'll have to fight me first. The ocean was silent, too silent. No wind, no waves, just an unnatural stillness that stretched across the dark waters. Serena stood at the bow of the Leviathan's grin, her fingers curled around the railing. She could feel them beneath the surface, the sea witches. Their presence slithered through the water like cold, invisible hands. They had come for her. Behind her, the crew moved in tense silence, hands gripping weapons they knew might be useless against magic. And beside her stood Dante Blackwave. Tell me where to aim, princess. His voice was steady, unwavering. Serena's throat tightened. He was still willing to fight for her. Even now, against an enemy he couldn't see, against the sea itself. She closed her eyes, listening. Then a ripple. A shadow moved beneath the waves. They're here, a crewman shouted. Before Serena could speak, the ocean erupted. Water shot into the sky, twisting into dark, serpent-like shapes. From within the rising sea, figures began to emerge, pale, eerie, with hair like floating ink and ice like the abyss. The witches. The tallest among them stepped forward, her voice like a whispering tide. Daughter of the sea, it is time to return. Serena clenched her fists. No. The witch tilted her head, her expression unreadable. You do not belong among them. Dante stepped forward. She belongs where she chooses. The witch's gaze flicked to him, her lips curling in amusement. Ah, the pirate. She raised a hand, and the water swirled around Dante's feet, dragging him forward. Serena reacted instantly. She lifted her hand, her own power answering in a surge of light. The water stilled, releasing Dante. The witch's eyes narrowed. You would fight your own kind? Serena's heart pounded, but her voice didn't waver. I will not be your prisoner. The sea rumbled in response, waves crashing violently against the ship. The witches raised their hands, the water rising like claws, ready to drag the Leviathan's grin beneath the surface. Dante grabbed Serena's hand. Tell me what to do. Her pulse thundered. The ocean obeyed the witches, but it also listened to her. She turned to the crew, her voice carrying across the deck. Strike the water. Don't let them form the tide. Without hesitation, the pirates sprang into action. Gunfire and cannons shattered the stillness. Each blast disrupted the swirling magic, forcing the witches to weave their spells slower. Serena closed her eyes, reaching deep. She had spent her life running from her power, from her past. But now she embraced it. The sea shifted. A deep, ancient force stirred beneath the waves, not the witch's power, but Serena's. The ocean roared, not in rage, but in defiance. The tides obeyed her. The witches hissed in frustration as the waves turned against them, pushing them back, forcing them to retreat. The leader's eyes locked onto Serena. You cannot deny your blood. Serena stepped forward, unafraid. I am not denying it. I am claiming it. The final wave rose like a great hand, and then collapsed, taking the witches with it. The ocean fell silent once more. The crew let out a thunderous cheer, but Serena barely heard them. She turned to Dante, her breath unsteady. His green eyes studied her, a slow smile tugging at his lips. Remind me never to bet against you again. Serena let out a breathless laugh. Smart choice. The wind picked up again, filling the sails. The sea, her sea, was calm. She had won. And she had chosen to stay.